Okay. Hello, my name is Dr. Bend, and I am about to give you a lecture on healthcare history. And we're going to focus on the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and explain how it is our healthcare system got to be in the state that it is. And hopefully we're going to open up some eyes and create some change in our healthcare system. So before I get too deep into my own ego, I want to begin the lecture series. Modern healthcare history. 1960s. The 1960s, the AMA was in charge of drugs. They were basically the FDA. They were taking the place of the FDA. Anytime the AMA said something about a drug, the drug stock prices went through the roof. And so they were in charge of approving all these drugs. There were a lot of drugs that were on the market in the 60s that really shouldn't have been, as today, obviously. But there was a lot of money being made by these drug companies and the AMA as well. So there was really no incentive to stop selling the drugs because of all the money being made. The problem is that they had a lot of problems with the drugs, and eventually lawsuits began to happen. But I'm jumping ahead here. In the 1960s, the AMA was in charge of drugs, and the drugs were dangerous. Thalidomide is the one drug that I'm going to focus on because there's so many, I don't want to waste my time talking about all of them. But thalidomide seemed to be the worst one. Now, thalidomide was meant to treat morning sickness. And usually it's in the first trimester. You get sick in the morning, you throw up, nausea, you feel a little crappy. And so somebody came up with a drug that would treat that. So morning sickness went away, great, and so the rest of your pregnancy was as smooth as possible. The problem with that was that when the baby was born, they discovered that they had no arms. And this was a very common problem, and it became an epidemic kind of an issue because they had thousands of mothers who took this stuff. And you had thousands and thousands of what was termed flipper babies, because apparently the hormones that make the morning sickness present are necessary for arm bud development. So by interrupting that, the symptom itself, you were interrupting a natural process and causing a catastrophic birth defect. So thalidomide was obviously taken off the market fairly quickly. And the lawsuits that came from that started to hit the pharmaceutical industry in the 1970s. Now, the 1970s were a very ugly time for the pharmaceutical industry because they were being sued right left and sideways thanks to the thalidomide and other medical issues that were arising, because the out-of-control drugs that they were approving or getting approved and putting on the market were causing all kinds of problems. In the 1970s, these lawsuits started to devastate the pharmaceutical industry, and back in this time, there was no protection from Congress against lawsuits, so they were facing extinction. So Congress steps in at this time and begins the process of protecting the pharmaceutical companies from lawsuits. And I believe that happened in the late 1970s, 1977 if I'm not mistaken. Well, so they're failing. That's a big thing. So the pharmaceutical industry is kind of like out of the picture for a short while. The AMA in 1974 is sued by the chiropractic profession, okay, for restraint of trade practices. So not only were they approving drugs, they were trying to corner the market on healthcare by eliminating any and all of their competition. They got sued, and in the late 70s they started to realize that they weren't going to win, and so they started throwing bones at the chiropractic. Please, we'll give you this if you stop the lawsuit. We'll give you this if you stop the lawsuit. And so they gave chiropractors neck pain and back pain. Okay, and that's pretty much where the idea of neck pain and back pain for chiropractors started. And that's pretty much been a black eye for us ever since. We've been trying to fight that image. Not only this, but we also have the emergence of HMOs and PPOs in the 1970s. And this is a brainchild of President Richard Nixon. Actually, it's more of one of his advisors, but it came out of the Richard Nixon administration. And so the HMO PPO came into existence at this time. And the disturbing motive behind it was to create a more expensive healthcare system by providing less care. So the concept was for you, the consumer, to spend more money on your insurance and get less for it. And that's pretty much how Nixon agreed to. Okay, he agreed to it. The whole concept was, well, morally reprehensible, to be quite honest. But Nixon thought about that, and, well, he agreed to it. And so HMOs were born. Managed care. Oh, goody. So, but this is slow in starting. 1980s, on the other hand, are known in the chiropractic community as the Mercedes 80s. Insurance companies, thanks to the AMA giving us neck pain and back pain, we were getting paid hand and foot for all of our care. So you could have a small practice and you were making bank. And so this was actually a good thing and a bad thing at the same time, because chiropractors got lazy here. And so we made a lot of money, and we didn't really advance our profession very far because we got lazy. But mid-90s, the pharmaceutical industry is now recovering. So the congressional efforts to protect the pharmaceutical industry in the 70s starts to bear fruit in the 90s. Okay, so the pharmaceutical company is beginning to recover its economic strength. And now that they can't be sued by anybody for the death and destruction that their products cause, they can go about selling the drugs again. And so we start seeing more and more pharmaceutical commercials emerge on television in the 1990s. And now you can't turn on the TV and not see one. You can't read a magazine and not see a pharmaceutical ad. So right now they're pretty much out of control with making money. Not that the making money is a bad thing, but there should be a little bit more regulation to their advertising. With all this economic wealth that they now have, they started to buy insurance company shares on the stock exchange. And so they buy these shares and they become the controlling shareholders of many of the insurance companies, particularly the Blue Cross Blue Shield franchise, because they are the largest healthcare system and they basically control the shots in the insurance industry as a whole. So having the insurance industry become a non-regulated, or basically they're exempt from antitrust laws, you still have a large multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that owns controlling shares of that industry. Where do you think the insurance industry money is going to go? So they own controlling shares of the insurance industry, and the insurance industry has no real functional regulation. Kind of tells you how our system works right now, doesn't it? So if you have pharmaceutical coverage, you're going to get your drugs paid for right, left, and sideways, no trouble. You'll get some surgery covered right, left, and sideways. Okay, provided that it puts you on the permanent list for lifetime medications. So if you become a permanent lifetime devotee of the pharmaceutical industry, your insurance coverage will cover everything that you want as long as you use drugs and surgery only as your care. If you try to find anything other than drugs and surgery, you're up a creek. So right now, our healthcare industry is all about profit. And the pharmaceutical industry owns the insurance industry, and pretty much that paints the picture of where we are right now. If you have cancer, your answer is pharmaceuticals. That's what they're going to let you have. They're not going to let you have nutritional supplementation that might actually work better, but they're going to insist that you actually have pharmaceuticals. You have to have chemotherapy. And here's another problem that I have with Big Pharma running the show, is because, one, chemotherapy is only functional on 4 non-lethal brands of cancer, to be quite honest. Most of the other cancers that we have nowadays are nutrition-based. And it's based on a lot of the food that we consume that isn't as pure as it should be or as clean as it should be, and we are getting poisoned by what we eat. But it's also illegal, believe it or not, to treat cancer with anything but chemotherapy or radiation. And we all know the side effects of chemotherapy are pretty severe. So we have right now a very toxic healthcare system because of the monetary influences of certain entities in healthcare. So we have the 1960s, which the AMA basically is in control of all the drugs that get on the market. They make a boatload of cash, and the drugs that they approve cause a big problem for the pharmaceutical industries, not necessarily the AMA though. So the pharmaceutical industry gets nailed for the approval. 1970s, the lawsuits in the pharmaceutical companies basically bring them to their knees and almost take them out. The AMA gets sued by the chiropractors, and HMOs come into being. Bad time. Mercedes 80s, lots of money for the chiropractors. We get a little lazy, and we don't do our job. 1990s, pharmacy recovers and buys insurance and becomes the controlling monster of the entire healthcare industry. Basically, what the pharmaceutical industry has right now is a monopoly. They are regulated themselves, but they bought an industry that isn't regulated, and so they own healthcare. They own it. So when an insurance company starts to say, well, we have to honor our shareholders, the contract we have with our shareholders, you now know who they're talking about. Their shareholders happen to be the corporate heads of the pharmaceutical industry. And so I want you to think of a very large funnel, okay, an oil funnel. And that big funnel is full of hoses. Okay, that funnel is full of hoses and one spout. Okay, so this is how our insurance companies work. This is how our healthcare system works. You pay them. Okay, you dump money into that stream. They direct the money to the farm. That's how that works. The doctors who work for them make the most money. The doctors who write you the prescriptions. How many of you have gone to your doctors and you've never really seen your doctor? He hardly speaks to you, but he writes you a script before you even get 10 words out of your mouth. Right there. They're making money hand over fist. They're not taking care of you, they're writing a script. 9 times out of 10, those docs have carpal tunnel from writing so many scripts. So you are the consumer, you are paying into their system, and they are directing it to one area only. Now you should be able to choose what kind of health care you get. Are you able to? No. And if you choose something that actually works for you, how often do you think that doctor gets paid and how often do you get stuck with the bill?